Motoring 93 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas for brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service. Trust your car to Midas.
It's a beaut, isn't it? A 1956 Chevy Bel Air. And later on, we're going to have a look at some other classics on Motoring 93 when we browse through the Shelby Shop in Milton, Ontario. And you know, when you look at a car like this, you can't help but think back to when we were young. And for some of us, that's longer than we care to admit. But you know, back in those days, it always seemed to me that the guys with the cool cars ended up with the cool ladies. Or was that just my imagination? Or maybe I was just watching too much TV.
Every time I went to the beach with Albert, some big muscle guy was always kicking sand in his face. It made me so mad. He tried all the exercises, went through the diet. I wonder whatever happened to him.
Albert's a Mustanger now. He bought a beautiful Mustang convertible, one of 3 Mustangs for $65. Nothing soft about this car, except the all-vinyl interior and the carpeting. With a big 200 cubic inch strong arm 6, he's got a tough new kind of action. And when he added optional power brakes, power steering, all of a sudden his whole life changed. Nobody's kicking sand at Albert now. We don't spend much time here anymore. Put a few kicks in your life. Take a Mustang out for a little road work. Mustang, Mustang, Mustang.
Now I ask you, why can't they make car commercials like those anymore? They've got to sell cars, but you know, that commercial really illustrates the fact that even back then, advertisers realized that cars do have a certain sex appeal, and they could even boost someone's image, not to mention sales. Now, advertisers aren't quite as obvious anymore, but the same can't be said for the many car shows that are held each year across the country. Along with the hot rods, you can always count on a bevy of beauties and even beauty pageants to help draw the customers. Bill Taylor is a longtime car enthusiast who writes for the popular wheels section of the Toronto Star. Now, Bill loves to attend car shows, but he's fed up with the bikinis, and he's even threatened to boycott his favorite shows as long as the girls and the beauty pageants remain.
Surprised me actually that in this day and age they're still doing this. You know, I thought car shows had gotten out of the whole chicks in bikinis thing. I mean, it's a family-oriented activity now, as a lot of women are active in it, and it's just inappropriate. So I wrote the column saying, hey, this is the show, this is what they've got. They've also got the bikini pageant, and this is where I make my stand. I won't be there, and I didn't go. I've been going to shows in England, for a quarter of a century. In the States, I guess the first show I went to was in '73 in New York, and as I recall, there certainly wasn't a beauty pageant. There may have been women around the cars, you know, scantily clad, but I mean, maybe it was more acceptable then, I don't know, but I don't think it's not acceptable now. It's totally inappropriate.
Well, I've always believed that in the past that cars and girls mix, and a lot of girls like fast cars, and I think that they add a little flavor. You know, you just don't want to have an all event for just men. You know, you got cars, women love cars, and guys love cars, and you know, I just think cars and girls mix.
I think it's completely inappropriate. I think people come here because they want to see the cars, and I think it's really gratuitous to have women walking around half dressed at these types of shows. I feel that that women who do it should be really examining what they're doing here, and I just disagree with it.
There you go, adds a little sunshine to you.
It's not really an exploitation of women if the women choose to do it, right? So they can't be saying you're being exploited, this and that, when we are being, you know, we're doing it because we like to do it, and if we feel we're being exploited, we wouldn't do it. So if they don't like it, again, they don't have to look at it. That's all I can say about that.
Who'd like a poster? $3 per poster, $5 for Polaroid. Okay, Tracy, do you think that do women belong at auto shows, or what do you think about that?
I think it's great. I think cars and the car shows go hand in hand. If it's done tastefully, I think it's great. And I think that there's far too many more important issues in the world that should be discussed.
Good.
Feminism is, such a minuscule little thing.
Personally, I find it very distracting. I find sometimes when I'm wanting to see a product, I can't get to that product because there are so many people around that are just busy looking at, ogling at the woman and taking pictures and stuff. I can't even get in there. I find it very distracting, yes.
I'd like a poster, $3.
I think girls and cars are synonymous. They both go together. Like, the girls bring the guys out to the show and the guys get their cars showing. So I don't see anything wrong with it. Not one thing.
I think there was somebody that wrote an article in the paper recently saying that girls and cars don't go together. But I'm sure if you've seen for yourself, the two go like a hand in glove. You can't do without them. And besides that, GM is still using girls to advertise their product. It might be a little bit more subtle, but it's still being done. You have the lady in the car, driving the car, telling people how well it handles, what a beautiful color it is, the interior is so perfect for her. That's using women to advertise. So it's being done. Muscle cars and women go together.
How's it work for you here? Pretty good business?
I think it's working great. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be making a calendar every year. Right. That's all I could tell you.
I think if he showed up without the girls in bikinis, he'd probably still get the crowds and the business if he had a nice car. Sure, if there are girls there, people are going to go and look at them, sure. I'd probably look at them myself if I was passing by. I mean, we're all human. But if they're not there, is it going to make that big of a difference? I don't think so. I thought there'd be some reaction from women. I thought also from men. Strangely enough, there was nothing at all from men, which surprised me. And I guess it shows that the guys maybe realize that I'm right on this. Maybe.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we take a look at the totally redesigned and restyled Ford Ranger. A little later on this year, Mazda will release their own version of this very pickup truck as they replace their aging B-Series trucks. The Ford Ranger is the best-selling compact pickup on the market. Little wonder when you look at what the truck has to offer. The new aerodynamic look really sets this vehicle apart. The aero headlights, flush-fitting glass, aircraft-style doors and rounded contours combine to give the truck a slick yet tough appearance. The 4x4 version gets a unique grille, fender flares and a sporty-looking front valance that incorporates round driving lights. The overall effect is very pleasing and is sure to maintain the sales volume, if not increase it. Switching between 2- and 4-wheel drive on this Ranger is accomplished with ease. To get from 2-wheel drive high to 4-wheel drive high, you simply hit the 4x4 button. To get to the low range, bring the vehicle to a stop, bang the low range and Bob's your uncle. We're now in 4x4 low range and off to tackle some pretty rough terrain. For 93, the handling characteristics have been improved immensely. To begin with, the track has been increased 1.4 inches. Now this does two things. First, from an aesthetic point of view, it makes the truck look very muscular and as though it's firmly planted on the ground. Secondly, and from a practical perspective, it improves the handling characteristics both on and off-road. The suspension on the 4x4 consists of Ford's twin traction beams set up in front with single-stage multi-leaf springs in back with heavy-duty gas pressurized shocks and sway bars at both ends. Ride comfort is, for the most part, comfortable. On the road, there is some of the usual stiffness, but the recalibrated spring rates go a long way in smoothing out the bumps. Off-road, the ride is surprisingly good, meaning you do not need a kidney belt. During the test, we tackled some pretty rough snow-covered terrain with ease, the credit going to the huge P235/75 R15 all-terrain tyres. Now, when equipped with these optional tyres, ground clearance is good. Ford really missed the boat in the design department when they elected to put in a foot-operated parking brake in a truck equipped with a 5-speed standard transmission. The reason being, trying to grope around under there to release that parking brake while you're doing a hill start just isn't on. So you end up riding the clutch. When you ride the clutch, you wear it out prematurely. No warranty, remember, because this is a wear and tear problem. The result is that because of poor engineering, you're going to be out of pocket about $500 or $600. Power is provided by a 3-litre V6 that produces 145 horsepower and a very usable 175 pounds-feet of torque, allowing you to accelerate to the 100k mark in just 10 seconds. Matched with this engine is a 5-speed manual transmission, with 5th being a straight overdrive gear. The other ratios are such that it's easy to keep the engine in the power band, a real necessity when off-road. During the test, we averaged 25.3 miles per gallon, or 11.1 litres per 100 kilometres. This type of mileage for a 4x4 truck is fairly good. For those interested, the maximum payload is 1,550 pounds and trailer towing is set at 2,500 pounds. Standard on the new Ranger is a power front disc rear drum setup with anti-lock on the rear only. During the brake test, we required 124 feet to stop from 80k. Unlike most trucks, the anti-lock system works even when in four-wheel drive, meaning the driver enjoys added braking stability under all conditions. When off-road, for instance, this means that the back end does not try to overtake the front on slippery downgrades, a very reassuring feeling. In redesigning this truck, Ford have done a very good job. It's pretty, it's preppy, and for the most part practical. I say for the most part. The problem with the standard cab is there is very little interior storage space, barely enough room for a bottle of washer fluid. So if you go with this truck, do yourself a favor, invest in a nice set of lockable boxes that you stick just behind you here. That way you'll have lots of room for all the incidentals that you always carry around with you. Inside the Ranger there is a lot of car-like comfort. To begin with, the cloth-covered sport bucket seats provide exceptional comfort and support. Add to that the convenience of power mirrors, locks and windows, plus cruise and tilt steering, and you have a very well-appointed vehicle. The dash features a full set of analog gauges that are both easy to read and interpret. The climate controls are plain, simple and therefore easy to use. The same cannot, however, be said of the radio. It is a mass of tiny buttons that are awkward to use at the best of times. That said, Ford do get points for putting the radio above the climate controls and for the fact that the sound quality offered is unparalleled in a pickup. That wraps up this week's test drive, and it's been fun. The only thing I've got left to do is to reiterate just how good a job Ford have done with the new Ranger. Whether you buy this vehicle or the Mazda derivative that will come later this year, I think it's safe to say that people that invest in these vehicles will be very happy campers.
If the shaker looks like it's shaking, well, that's the effect they were hoping for when they stuck it on this 1970 Hemi Cuda with 426 cubic inches and 425 horsepower. Now, this vehicle here at the Shelby Shop was ordered back in '70 strictly for racing, and it has only 900 original miles on it. And back in 1970, you could have purchased this vehicle for about $4,500. Today, the asking price is more like $75,000. All right, now Bill Gardner is standing by in the garage, and as you know, Bill has absolutely no time for air conditioning. He figures if you want to stay cool in the summer, don't buy a car with dark leather seats and roll down the windows. But when it comes to keeping the oil cool, well, that's a different matter. Here's Bill.
When you think of all the functions of engine oil, the first thing that comes to mind is lubricating. But of course, the engine oil cleans the internal parts of the engine as well, and it's also a really big cooling medium. The engine oil splashes over all the internal engine parts that are hot, whereas the engine coolant just circulates around the outside, around the water jackets. So the engine oil in certain applications can get really hot, and that breaks down the engine oil, degrades it faster than it should, and it can also shorten the life of the engine oil and the engine itself. So in certain applications, it's necessary to have an engine oil cooler. Now in this 350 Chevrolet truck engine, we've got an original installation. We're going to show you that today. You can see just above the oil filter about a 3-inch adapter on the engine block that spaces that filter down, and that's the engine oil cooler adapter. There's a couple of threaded ports in it with 2 pipes a feed and a return pipe that pass along the side of the engine block and come up and through this frame cross member. As they come through the cross member, they turn into a braided hose to take the hot, high-pressure engine oil, and they come up here to the front to the engine oil cooler. Now that's a little unit that's stacked just ahead of the engine radiator. It looks something like this. This particular one is for transmission oil, but the engine oil cooler is very similar. You can see that air can get through the slots in it. The engine oil is spread out thin so it passes through it and gives up its heat into the airstream. And it shares the airstream that's moved by the engine cooling fan. Now in certain applications, some trucks and certain cars, the engine oil cooler is incorporated right into the radiator. But if you're converting a vehicle for a trailer towing application, an engine oil cooler is something you really should think about. If you're ordering a new vehicle, in the case of a light truck, it's quite often an available option. For cars, it may be incorporated in certain engine packages, or if it isn't, you'll have to rely on an aftermarket kit, and there are kits available for most applications, and some even include an electric cooling fan to circulate extra air over the cooler. Now, if you're using a vehicle for heavy-duty application, the cooler will add a lot of life to the engine oil and the engine itself, of course. If your vehicle is used primarily for short trips or light-duty use, it's something you really don't need to worry about. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 93.
Although Shelbys get top billing, the Shelby Shop in Milton, Ontario sells and restores an impressive collection of classic cars.
We started in 1985, and we started out doing basically Shelbys and Mustangs. About 3-4 years ago, we got into some of the more exotic stuff, the Ferraris and the Cobras. We were doing classics now, like the 40s and 50s cars, doing just about anything that is of interest. We have just about every year Shelby that was made. We have a couple of Cobras. We have 2 original ones and a reproduction one. There's a man behind the cars, Carroll Shelby, who won Driver of the Year in '59, who made a car that beat Ferrari in the Le Mans. It's a '65 Cobra. It's a 289 car. It was a street car, pretty well fully optioned with the luggage rack and the radio. That car new would have probably been around $5,500. We sold the car recently for $225,000. The newest vehicle we have in is a '65 Cobra, but it was a factory race car. It's one of 2 built. It was called a Dragon Snake. It was built specifically for drag racing. This one has a real interesting history. In 1967, it also road raced. It's the only surviving original Dragon Snake left. There was another one that was restored after an accident.
Would you like to sell it for someday?
Hopefully about $500,000.
The statistics are frightening. There are 12 major auto crashes every minute in the United States. Many of the crashes result in drivers being trapped in overturned cars, burning autos, or vehicles in deep water. There's a new emergency tool on the market called the Life Hammer, designed to be used in such emergencies. It has 2 metal points that can smash glass with a tap, and a recessed razor blade that can be used to cut a seatbelt. But will it work? Recently on the David Horowitz program in the United States, a simulation of such a crash situation was conducted.
When you are involved in accidents, sometimes, most of the time when the car overturns, you have no way of getting out of the car. If you have an electric window, your windows are shut, your doors are jammed, you should install the Life Hammer within your reach, right on the side of the console. Even when your car is upside down, it will not move around. You will be able to reach it and to cut the seatbelt and break the glass.
With the car now in position, the battery removed, and all fluids drained from the vehicle, the volunteer climbs into the car through the sunroof, buckles up, and the test begins. She reaches for the Life Hammer and tries to cut the seatbelt. Next, the window. The Life Hammer was designed in West Germany, where it is used as standard equipment in most police cars. Simulating an accident and experiencing a real one are 2 different realities. So Motoring 93 dropped into one of Toronto's busiest rescue squads to see what the real experts think of the Life Hammer.
We viewed the tape, and from a professional point of view, I feel that as a rescuer, driving down the road, it's an ideal piece of apparatus to have close by where I can go and assist a public on my own. They're also good to have on a truck as well. Right now we carry center punches, but having it all in one unit, like a seatbelt cutter as well as a window breaker, is an excellent idea. And as I was saying before, as long as the person using this is involved in an accident and has the composure to be able to reach over and get this, it's an ideal situation to be inside. It's a good piece of apparatus.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns proper wheel bolt torque. It's an important final step to installing a wheel or tire that you correctly torque all the fasteners. I'm going to show you how to use a click type torque wrench today. To do that, there's a sequence and a specific torque value to be followed on each car. Be aware that if you're using an impact gun to tighten these, you can easily over tighten them. In that case, you could easily damage the studs or nuts, distort the wheel. You can even twist the brake drum or rotor. And there again, if you under torque them, the wheel can become loose and detached from the car. Keep in mind there's an adapter available nowadays called a Torque Pro that limits the amount of torque an impact gun can transfer to those wheel nuts. It'd be a good idea for service professionals to use that when they're installing the wheel. If the customer ever gets a flat tire, they'll be able to remove the wheel properly. That's your Midas tip of the week.
This is the kind of car that a lot of first-time drivers buy, but will they know how to drive it? My views on graduated licensing next on Kenzies Corner.
Kenzies Corner with Jim Kenzie.
There's been a lot of talk in Canada recently on the subject of graduated licensing. Motoring 93 covered the topic in some detail just last week. At least 2 provinces, Nova Scotia and Ontario, are introducing graduated licensing over the next few months. The details differ according to the jurisdiction, but basically the restrictions involve no driving after midnight, no freeway driving, and 0 tolerance for alcohol or traffic tickets. After a couple of years of controlled experience, new drivers can then take a much tougher test than the current one to get a full license. Now, some people complain that graduated licensing just can't work. They say that the police have enough to do now getting drunks and bad drivers off the road without worrying about what kind of license a young person has. But there's a hidden advantage working here. The fact that it's the law means that most people will obey it. Graduated licensing has proven to reduce the exposure of inexperienced drivers to the most dangerous types of traffic conditions. The inevitable result is fewer crashes. And there's another thing. It gives parents an additional weapon to use in their ongoing battle to keep their teenagers alive. I'd love to give you the car tonight, son, but it's against the law. No, I'm not saying I'm going to need any extra weapons for my 16-year-old daughter who's going for her license in a few months' time. She's a solid, reliable kid. But as any parent of a teenager will tell you, we need all the help we can get. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, we're about to wrap things up here at the Shelby Shop in Milton, Ontario. You're looking at a replica of the 1966 Shelby Cobra. Price tag about $40,000. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Motoring 93 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas for brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service. Trust your car to Midas.